like Kerwin mentioned, I too have been thinking about the Lenape and how that they didn't really have a sense of owning a place. I know they did, though, have a strong sense of belonging to a place. I talked about their sense of belonging to this island 2 weeks ago. They have a sense of belonging to the natural world, as he mentioned, the world all around them, and being in constant relationship to it, to the land, to the water, to plants, animals, to the birds in the sky. I'm moved by that sense of connectedness to a place, partly because I don't experience a lot of it these days. Oh yeah, I enjoy a walk in a natural setting, but I'm just at home in the concrete, asphalt, glass, and steel canyons of Manhattan. Having to sleep out under the stars would have me worried about being bitten by insects or bears coming after me. Today, I don't have the sense of belonging to a physical place like I hear from Wendell Berry or Bell Hooks talking about Kentucky. She writes, living away from my native place, I became more consciously Kentuckian than I was when I lived at home. This was what the experience of exile can do: change your mind, utterly transform one's perception of the world of home. Yet, if I'm going to be honest and think back to my childhood, maybe I'm more a product of Newark, Delaware than I realize. I spent 18 years, elementary school through high school and 2 years of college, living at the same address on Dallas Avenue. Next to our property was a big concrete-lined drainage ditch. Behind our house was a wooded area that extended back to the Penn Central railroad tracks. My windows in my room vibrated. We were close enough as the trains rushed by going from New York to Washington, D.C. I spent many of my growing up hours and years in those woods, playing in that ditch, getting really dirty, exploring the natural world, making trails, and then getting so close that I had an intimacy with this bit of land that was eventually converted into a park. I did have a strong sense of belonging to this little tract of trees, fields, and a swamp. My parents' home, too, also gave me a sense of belonging to that community. Many of my friends lived nearby. I was out playing with them all the time. No supervised play dates back then. I got home from school and was gone till dinner time in the woods or playing in someone's backyard. It wasn't until I approached graduating from high school that I started to dawn on me that my family home didn't belong to me. It belonged to my parents. I would need to move out someday and make my way in the world. Another source of belonging besides those woods and our family home on Dallas Avenue that has grown much and more strong as I've gotten older is our Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Newark. It was less than a mile away from our home, right next to my elementary school. Both my father and my mother at different times served as president of the fellowship. Going through my father's papers this summer, I found several sermons that he did on scientific humanism. And I went through my elementary school RE classes there too. I took About Your Sexuality and learned all kinds of things I didn't know anything about. The first building that fellowship property was a hall that they built surrounded by trees, just big enough for them to have their Sunday services. They realized that they didn't have enough space, and so because they had a lot of kids, they decided that they'd build a religious education building next to the fellowship hall. Contractors built the frame, and the members finished the inside. I remember putting up drywall, taping, putting plaster over the nails, sanding, and painting that space. That building had our family sweat equity in it. We built and belonged to that place. Beyond belonging to that place, I had other feelings of belonging to Unitarian Universalism that I didn't recognize until I left home. That happened in the fall of my junior year at the University of Delaware. A restlessness had driven me to drop out, get a rail pass, and find myself, as we did back in the 70s, find myself extending my horizons beyond Newark, Delaware. Riding on the rails, traveling across the country, down the West Coast. I stopped in Corvallis, Oregon. I was thinking that I would like to look for a job there and stayed over the weekend. On Sunday morning, I went to the Unitarian Church, I think a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship it was called there. Immediately, I felt at home there looking at the art and the posters on the walls. In the service, I recognized the hymns that we sang. The members were very friendly toward me and went out to lunch with a few of them, and one of them lent me a bicycle to get around. And while I didn't stay there, even just visiting once, I knew I belonged to that congregation. Where I did land was in Palo Alto, California, and my first Sunday there, I attended the Palo Alto Unitarian Church. Again, I had a very strong sense of belonging, even though I didn't know anyone. That Unitarian Church became my connection to the San Francisco Bay Area and my way to develop a network of relationships. No internet or World Wide Web back then to help me make friends and meet people. I didn't get involved in the two UU congregations in Berkeley while I finished my degree there 2 years later. A few years after graduation, however, my partner, a UU, and I thought getting involved with a UU congregation would be good for our relationship. We tried out the Oakland Unitarian Church. It was the most beautiful sanctuary of any UU congregation I had attended, with a high redwood ceiling, gorgeous stained glass windows, and very comfortable seats. What drew me in was the young, brash minister who was committed to both social justice and spiritual practice. This was the time I was just becoming devoted to Buddhist meditation. Sadly, the church didn't save my relationship with my partner. It was my relationship with the minister and that congregation that helped inspire me to move out of my career and follow a call to Unitarian Universalist ministry. Belonging to that place changed my life. Belonging changed for me as I entered the ministry. That became clear during my internship at the Rochester Unitarian Church in upstate New York in 1988-89. As an intern, my relationship with the members of the church was different. I was now in a ministerial relationship with them, not a fellow congregant. I was there to serve their needs and couldn't ask them to take care of mine. While I felt connected to the place and the people, I knew it couldn't be my place. I could serve them, but I couldn't belong in the way that I had to past congregations. One positive discovery of my internship, however, was realizing I belonged to New York State. I realized that I'd never felt fully at home in California, beautiful as the places I lived were. Fall colors, the white blanket of snow, spring flowering trees, green everywhere in the summer, and thunderstorms felt like home to me. New York, I discovered, is a place I belong. I've served 2 congregations as a settled minister. The first was in Port Charlotte, Florida. Port Charlotte is what I might call a soulless town that was created by developers. Lots were sold there for $50 a month to union workers up the I-85 corridor as a warm, cheap place to live when they retired. The congregation just had a large room with a little social hall attached. A large room that had a drop ceiling, elevated very small windows that you couldn't look out of, and wood paneling in the front with a raised pulpit built in. People came down for the winter months and then returned north as soon as it warmed up. Everything about this community was built to serve retirees. This wasn't a place I felt I belonged, being in my early 40s and having a 6-year-old child. The call to Albany was quite different. They had a New England-style chapel built in the 1920s. Unfortunately, the congregation didn't quite fit into it, and they were doing 2 services when I came. My arrival re-energized their desire to expand their building, which required buying and demolishing 3 properties next door. The addition the congregation did build 6 years later was a modern, multi-use space with a balcony that could seat a total of 300 people. I remember every time I stood in that pulpit being moved by how beautiful the space is and how fortunate I was to be their minister. While I served there, I felt like I belonged in that space where I'd participated in the design process. Thinking about these different UU congregations that I've been part of, I've been pondering what caused me to have this sense of belonging. I'm sure there were people who visited these spaces and didn't feel what I felt. I know my social location is part of that feeling of belonging. My father was a professor of physical chemistry. My mother was an academic reference librarian. That's how you make a Unitarian, by the way. It's science and books, thinking in books. Being a dual income family starting in the 1970s meant that we were financially comfortable. Like most other UU Fellowship members, they owned their own home. Being heterosexual, cisgender European Americans with progressive values in politics, we are again like many of the other members. Most of my childhood peers, inside and outside the congregation, went to college and got good jobs. These dynamics of the membership of the UU Fellowship of Newark have matched all the congregations in which I've been a member. Those sociological factors, more than what we believed or didn't believe, facilitated that sense of belonging. My experience wasn't shared, however, by a retired black man I'll call George in the UU congregation I served in Albany. He was raised in a physically abusive household in the Midwest. He got involved with substance abuse and found his way into recovery. This fellow did go and get a social work degree, but wasn't able to save much money when he retired. In many ways, he didn't fit the sociological profile of many UUs in the Albany UU congregation. What brought him to our congregation were our UU principles and values. These were very important to him and in his recovery process, and they matched his religious values. But socially, he didn't feel at all at home in a predominantly white congregation. And he also regularly experienced microaggressions and discrimination. I don't believe, in most cases, there was any intent to harm him, but harm happened just the same. What I deeply desired and worked towards for George, and desire here for every member and friend of this congregation, is a very positive experience of belonging to this congregation, to this place. I want all the good that I've experienced in my life from belonging to UU congregations to be available to everyone. And making that happen will require inner and outer transformation. It is the work that the eighth principle that was passed by this congregation, I understand, calls us to do. Much of the eighth principle has been integrated into our new Article 2 language, and you'll be hearing more about that beginning in January. We can be responsive to both by being intentional about dismantling latent white supremacy culture that exists here, as well as in most UU congregations, as well as most American institutions. It doesn't happen just by wishing that it would go away. It takes a willingness to be uncomfortable for the benefit of deeper inclusion and pluralism. How do we do it? Let us return to Wendell Berry's words. Let it be lighted also by the light that is within you, which is the light of imagination. By it you see the likeness of people in other places to yourself, in your place. It lights invariably the need for care toward other people, other creatures in other places, as you would ask them to care toward your place and you. The opportunities for developing a sense of belonging to this congregation are great. So many New York City dwellers are looking for a sense of widely inclusive community that has both warmth, depth, and opportunities for service. For so many who live in apartments, the continuity of our publicly accessible space is precious. Those who are in a transient, explorative phase of their lives can find a home here that welcomes and encourages inner growth, development, and transformation. And the natural beauty of Central Park is literally on our doorstep. May we cherish this place. We have the good fortune to belong and extend an invitation to all who share our values and a wide welcome to belong in this place as well. So be it.